Hello, listeners. Today we're wrapping up our series on youth with a conversation with artist, activist, and supervising attorney of the Community Justice Unit at the Legal Aid Society, Anthony Posada. We talk about the impact of the NYPD's gang database on youth of color in New York City and what you can do to get involved to prevent the use of this database. Stay tuned. When we get back, we'll be joined by Anthony. Anthony, thanks so much for joining us on Dismantling Injustice.
Thank you for having me, Carl. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, just to start out, could you tell us a little bit about the work you do at the Community Justice Unit at the Legal Aid Society and how you came to this work?
Sure. Before I was in this unit, I was a public defender in the county of Queens. So I worked there representing people charged with misdemeanors and felonies. And then I moved into this unit as a staff attorney, and I eventually became a co-supervising attorney of the unit. And what really drew me to this work was the fact that it was focused on being embedded with community groups that are focused on treating gun violence in New York City as a public health issue. Those groups are known collectively as the crisis management system, and the model that they work on has a more global framing, which is called cure violence. So cure violence is the theory that sees gun violence as a disease that spreads and that should be treated as a virus, so that we are going for the core and the root issues that create violence and gun violence. So when I saw that there was an opening and that legal aid was focused on this work, I said, I want to see what this is about, because I've always had a really strong passion for working in the community. And so this is how I got started in the Community Justice Unit. The work that we do with those crisis management organizations is that we provide them wraparound legal services. So even though I come with a public defense background, I can speak to community members who need assistance on immigration issues, on housing issues, on employment matters.
That's so great. I had no idea that that's what you all did and that you were so ingrained with the organizations that you work with. That's incredibly powerful work. Now, I know that you've also had quite a bit of exposure, both as a public defender and I imagine in your work now, to the NYPD's gang database, as it impacts communities. Can you outline for our listeners, well, one, what the NYPD gang database is, the impact that it has on people's lives, especially some of the young people that you all work with, and any examples you may have of how it's been used by police and prosecutors?
Absolutely. So the NYPD gang database is as the name says, it's a collection of data gathered by NYPD that really started to increase around the time that stop and frisk was being ruled unconstitutional. There was a public announcement made by the then police commissioner, Raymond Kelly, that said something to the effect that it was youth, crews, and gangs who were causing the majority of violence in the city, and that as a result, they were going to be investing heavily in Operation Crew Cut, doing these massive gang raids, militarized style, showing up primarily in niche developments, and sometimes in conjunction with other law enforcement agencies like ATF, Homeland Security, ICE, suited up as if, we're talking about military across seas and wars, and coming in and taking people from their homes and parading them through their neighborhoods and saying that these were the worst of the worst, that they were really getting problem out of the community. And it was really that announcement that sort of drew more attention to it and made us focus on it. And then shortly after that, through research and scholarship by Professor Babe Powell from CUNY School of Law, we obtained documents. One of them was actually the NYPD form that was used to label people and enter them into the database. And so that form would lay out criteria The first one being if you admitted to membership in a gang, which as public defenders and just somebody who works in the community, we know that when somebody's stopped by the police or arrested, they just don't say, "Oh, I'm with such and such a gang." Like that's just not what happens. The second way in which people could enter the database according to that form was that if they were identified by two sources, and those sources were usually also law enforcement agents, just under other names like school safety agents, parole officers, Department of Correction officers. And then the third set of criteria was the one that was like really, really overtly racist and would say things like, if you meet any of the two, you could be entered. And those two would consist of things like if you live in a certain neighborhood, if you're seen associating with certain people, if you have a certain handshake that you use, if you have scars or tattoos, if you wear colors, and those colors, again, were not limited to like two colors, but included like every color within the spectrum. What this would do is that it would create a target for communities of color across the city. So it was from that we came to understand that what was really happening was like this guilty by association form of criminalization. And so people's friendships were being criminalized. And then throughout the years, right, that took us back to 2012. But since then, we've seen an evolution through any of your social media. So this is incredibly broad because it means that if they're seen with somebody, or they say, I live on 135th and something like, that alone can be used as the basis for entry into the database. They will claim that that is admission. This includes emojis. So any single thing that you put on social media, it will be used against you. And so that's how we came to find out more about the database, but also because the raids were happening in the neighborhoods that we were working with, and the neighborhoods that we were serving. We were seeing the raids happening, and we would speak to community members, mothers, fathers, aunts, just loved ones who would ask us questions like, how did this happen? If they were surveilling my son for such a long time, why didn't nobody tell me anything? Why didn't somebody intervene? And so since then, we have always called out the database. We've always pointed out that it doesn't keep New Yorkers safe. It's not used as a tool of public safety. It is made up of a lot of just junk information, racist information, and that at the end of the day, it just needs to be eliminated and abolished altogether. That is a little bit of what we know, what we're doing, and how we understand the database to operate. And it also works in conjunction with other units of the NYPD, such as the Social Media Analysis and Research Team, which is abbreviated the SMART team. So there are NYPD detectives and officers whose job it is to just troll social media, look at social media posts and enter people on it. And so you have this system, which it's made up of currently of like 16,000 New Yorkers who is 99% people of color, and one in which people can never get off of. There's no procedure for people who are labeled in the database to get off of the database. And we have helped community members find out if they're on it, but with the understanding that we can't guarantee that they will be removed, or that that we could help them get removed from it. So it's hugely problematic, very concerning, and it just is used as an excuse to continue surveilling communities of color.
I just wanted to get something straight. So you're saying that there are NYPD officers whose job it is just to search through social media to identify potential quote unquote gang members for this database.
That's correct. So we've known from our own clients that officers have asked them for their social media handles during questioning, that officers have used these coercive tactics to get access to their pages so that they can then see who they are connected with, who their friends are, who they are messaging. But that unit is specifically devoted to that, Carl. So it's called, SMART, but quote unquote, really what it's doing is just we're paying people to observe other people's social media and to use that to classify them as gang members.
So we heard that the New York City Department of Investigation, we know they recently released a report examining the NYPD's use of the gang database. What are some of the most important takeaways from the report, and what impact do you think this report will have, if any at all?
We have to start with the most problematic thing in the report, just to make sure we understand it and break it down. The report goes on to say, as a top level finding, that there's no harm emanating from the database. And for people who might not have read the report, it's really crucial to look at the paragraph that follows that statement, which says that they didn't find harm because they didn't look for it, that they didn't find harm because it was beyond the scope of the report, that they didn't find harm because to do so would mean that they would have to follow the lives of people who were ultimately labeled to see what happened. And so the report starts off making that statement, but then everything after that just goes to the contrary. Everything after that says we've seen all these irregularities. There's no processes. There's nothing but confusion. We've seen instances, and this is one of the many shocking findings that the report makes. One of them is we've seen instances where there's this supposed structure internal for the NYPD, where if one officer from the field, a patrol officer, says, I think so and so is part of a gang, that has to be reported to a supervisor, and that supervisor then puts it up the chain so that the next person can verify, so that you have like these two levels before someone is entered into the database. But the report found that in many, many instances, in the majority of them, one single officer is making all those entries. So like one officer alone is serving as the two levels of review and approving somebody's being on the database. So that's deeply, deeply problematic and points to, officers not following their own procedures and police officer misconduct, to just put it bluntly. One other shocking instance or discovery, while we knew this, the report finally, puts it in its own language and says that a single emoji can land somebody on the database. And they've gone on to confirm this, right? As we spoke, like a single emoji. So it means that the minimal social media activity can be used and construed against somebody in a light where they're going to be entered into the database. They're going to be seen as gang involved and gang members.
Wow.
Other shocking findings that it makes is that, again, people stay on there indefinitely. People stay on there with no way to get off of it, and that there's no due process, and that there's no appeal for. So like if somebody's on it, they can go and contest their being included and say, please get me removed. I had nothing to do with this gang. But instead they'll just stay on there permanently. Another one of the shocking findings is that they say there's about 16,000 people on the database who are considered active, but that there's all these other people, and that for this they don't give a number, that are put into like the background as inactive, but whose information is never removed from the database. So you're talking thousands and thousands of people. The one time that the NYPD had to actually address this in a public setting was a city council hearing by the Public Safety Committee in 2018. And during that time, before the hearing, there was confirmation that there were around like 34,000 people on the database. And the day that we went to that hearing, they said the number was somewhere around like 18,000. So it's like we were still in this world where like there could very well be just like 50,000. They're just saying that there's 16,000 that are active, but that you have all these other people who they consider to be inactive, who are for all intents and purposes not removed from the database and accessible to officers at any given time. And so when an officer stops somebody on the street, can ask them for their ID, and their information is put into these databases, that information can come up, right? So if I was seen in a picture with somebody and suddenly an officer who's stopping me says, well, looks like Anthony's, connected to this gang from Queens. Let's find out. This is a stop that now I'm going to see or treat differently because of this information that I now have at my disposal. So those are among some of the key takeaways. And the report in and of itself, even though, it was subjected to all these delays, and there was a coalition of us who were demanding it for the past 5 years. Another thing that was shocking, but not completely, was that the DOI seemed to have it held back, really kind of watered it down a little bit, and that was disappointing because we've seen other reports from the DOI in the past under different leadership that have gone on to contribute to advocacy changes and serve the function of the DOI, which was to, hold the NYPD accountable. But in this instance, we just didn't get that.
Well, I know that you all have been working really hard to, to actually address the gang database. Can you tell us a bit about the legislation that's moving in the city council and how, how we can support passage of the bill that's moving right now and the Erase the Database campaign?
Sure. So, Intro 360 is a city council bill that has a lot of co-sponsors at the moment, but could always use more. The idea would be under this bill that there would be a complete eradication of the database, like abolish it altogether. But it's also very important to add, and the legislation has this, no room for successor databases, right? Because you could just be in a world where you eliminate what you have in one place, but then just move that and call it by another name. And so it says, have no successor databases, inform all the people that you had on it, give them an opportunity to see what documents you had on them, and give more, have like regular audits in this area to make sure that it's actually being followed. And so like, those are some of the rough contours of the bill, but at the heart of it is really the position that there doesn't need to be a database, that we don't need the database, and that we should get rid of it altogether. Because in the past, other elected officials once tried to pass a bill to legislate around the database that was more focused on providing minors. And again, this is another thing that is shocking as a finding, but that we knew of, that there are many children who are on the database as young as 14, who are being included onto there. And so someone in the past in city council tried to put a bill that would say, give parents notice that their children are being included in the database. And of course, advocates and others, including us, said, that we oppose that. That's not enough, because what you're really trying to do is you legitimize the database, for one, and you created, according to your eyes, a better version, or a version that is going to comply with due process. But we're saying, that's not what's needed. And instead, let's continue investing in community resources and community programs and community solutions that are backed up by evidence that show that there are other ways to treat violence in the community. And so the best way that people can support is really, they can Google Intro 360 in City Council, see if their elected officials in their districts are signed on, and if not, you reach out to them and ask them to support it.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, this is just so shocking that they're literally ruining children's lives. Like someone can get on the database at age 14 and they'll just remain on almost indefinitely. And oftentimes they won't even know.
Yeah, absolutely. Just something that I did not sort of clarify. So if I were to walk somebody step by step of how it works, like if I'm included in the database and I don't know, but I'm arrested, the allegation, the label will come up in court. And so now the prosecutor can say to the judge, Judge, we're requesting bail in the amount of, 5,000. This person is a known gang member. Just the use of the word, it's so charged and so loaded, right, is going to now taint the judge's opinion about this person in front of them. So imagine that word is used and exploited in the criminal system so much, where it's used to request higher bail, where it's used to keep people on a remand status so that they're kept at Rikers Island. It's used to demand higher sentences of people if there's allegations that the charges that they're being accused of had anything to do with gangs. And then the database itself is used to put together these conspiracy cases, sometimes under the RICO statute in federal law, where people are facing an enormous amount of years under severe penalties that just force them to take pleas. And so, have to say that there is no harm flowing from the label itself is just so inaccurate, because we've seen directly from our clients and communities that it's something that follows people and that causes significant harm in their lives.
Yeah, I remember that allocution from DAs from when I was a public defender. Like during arraignments, they'd say, the defendant is a known gang member. They're in the database. And oftentimes, what they're charged with has nothing to do with anything violent or anything. So, yeah, it's really, there are just so many consequences with this database. So, last question, and just, for our listeners, I've known Anthony since both of us were in law school. And if I remember correctly, you're also an artist and cultural worker. And I know you're a big proponent of using the arts to advance social change. Can you talk to us about how that's going and any advice you might have for artists hoping to get involved with social justice work or the type of work that you do?
I enjoyed that. I recall those memories fondly. But yes, I've continued since that time working on something that is called Project Attica Community Through the Arts, which is a group that is devoted to using art for social justice purposes, or using art to create and activate spaces where people can be having conversations about the social justice issues that they're passionate, and elevating those messages through the arts. If you have an idea, and if you have like already a connection developed with the community, then go for it. I would say absolutely don't hold back. There's a lot of room to continue creating those spaces. To me, that's kind of the key of the work that we do, which is holding space. All people, when given the space and the opportunity to create art, engage with it, and engage with it in such a way that they derive meaning and they derive a sense of joy. And we need more of that across the city, and everyone should have more of that in their lives. And so, um, yeah, all artists out there who listen to this, go for it. Don't hold back. Look for those opportunities, because they're there. There's a lot of opportunities in the city that would fund your vision.
Fantastic. Thanks so much. That's amazing advice for any artists out there that want to get involved with our work. Well, Anthony, this has been great. Thank you so much for joining us. I learned a ton about the gang database and just how the NYPD uses social media to target and criminalize our communities. I'm sure our listeners learned a lot as well. So thank you. Thanks so much for taking time out of your day to join us.
Of course, Carl, thank you for having me. Thank you for the Dismantling Injustice podcast, for the work that you all are doing, and making sure that we are, sharing this and putting these messages into the airwaves. Yeah, it was a pleasure to be here.
Thanks so much, listeners. Thank you for joining us this week. Peace out.
Peace.
Thanks again for joining us. Dismantling Injustice is brought to you by Envision Freedom Fund, an organization that works to transform the immigration and criminal legal systems while meeting the critical needs of individuals impacted by these systems daily. To learn more about our work and donate, visit us at envisionfreedom.org. That's envisionfreedom.org. Dismantling Injustice was created by Sally Israel. Our executive producer is Abigail Wolf and hosted by Carl Hammett Lipscomb. That's me. Special thanks to the team at Envision Freedom for being amazing. Until we're all free, peace out.